These probable selves are to gain awareness of the other probable selves and realize that all are various manifestations of the true identity. These probable selves are to gain awareness of the other probable selves and realize that all are various manifestations of the true identity. And I'm going to just reiterate or stop for a second. What he's telling us there is that our soul has divested itself into multiple aspects of consciousness that have identity. They are different reincarnated identities that also have different probable selves. Okay? All these probable selves are part of the soul. They are all variations of the true identity. So in other words, for the soul to know itself, it has created us and many other aspects of ourselves that we would consider probable identities. So our soul has helped us create ourselves, and our soul is also helping create other probable selves. And each one of these probable selves thinks it's separate and just the same way as we do would expect that we don't exist, or maybe unknown that we even exist. And our, shall we say, I don't know, job or purpose or the next phase is for us to become aware of all our probable selves. Now, as far as the timeline goes, that's going to start with past lives. So as our consciousness grows and becomes more aware, one of the first things that we're going to do is become aware of our past lives. Those are other probable selves of our soul. Okay, to go on. In chapter 16 of Seth Speaks, starting 566 is the session. It says, for a change, we're going to have some dictation, though I may make a few remarks at the end of our session to you both. And that just refers to how Seth interweaves personal comments with the lives of Jane and her husband throughout the dictation. And then they keep them separate. It's like here he says dictation then, and goes on and starts the book. And that first sentence is, probabilities are an ever-present portion of your invisible psychological environment. You exist in the middle of the probable system of reality. It is not something apart from you. To some extent, it is like a sea in which you have your present being. You are in it, and it is in you. Occasionally, at surface levels of consciousness, you might wonder what might have happened had you made other decisions than those you have. Chosen different mates, for example, or taken up residence in other portions of the country. So he goes on, and of course we're going to get into what the title of the book, of the chapter, is, Probable Systems. See, chapter 16 is titled Probable Systems, Men and Gods. All right, let's start with an opening prayer. Thank you, Lord, for these few minutes to explore these ideas. May they help us lead more fulfilling lives and have that spill over to our friends and relatives and those in our hearts and minds, all harm-free. In the name of Jesus, amen. All right, We are continuing with Seth Speaks. We are in chapter 16 titled Probable Systems, Men and Gods, and we're beginning with session 566. All right, here we go. Probabilities are an ever-present portion of your invisible psychological environment. You exist in the middle of the probable system of reality. It's not something apart from you. To some extent, it's like a sea in which you have your present being. You are in it and it is in you. Occasionally at surface levels of consciousness, you might wonder what might have happened had you made other decisions than those of you that you've such as chosen different mates, for example, or taken up residence in other portions of the country. You might wonder what would have happened had you mailed an important letter that you subsequently decided not to mail. And in such small wonderings, have you ever questioned the nature of probabilities? But there are deep connections between yourself and all those individuals with whom you have had relationships and with whom you were involved in deep decisions. These are not nebulous. They are profound, psychological interconnections that bind you each to each, particularly in a telepathic framework, though this may be beneath normal consciousness. The unrealized physical connections that might have occurred but did not are worked out in other layers of reality. The invisible environment within your mind is not as lonely as you might think, and your seeming inner isolation is caused by the ego's persistent guard. It sees no reason, for example, why you should be informed of information that it does not consider pertinent to day-by-day daily activity. I do not like the phrase, quote, to advance, unquote. Yet, in your terms, to advance as a consciousness is to become more and more aware of these other materializations of your own identity. These probable selves are to gain awareness of the other probable selves and realize that all are various manifestations of the true identity. These probable selves are to gain awareness of the other probable selves and realize that all are various manifestations of the true identity. These probable selves are to gain awareness of the other probable selves and realize that all are various manifestations of the true identity. And I'm going to just reiterate or stop for a second. What he's telling us there is that our soul has divested itself into multiple aspects of consciousness that have identity. They are different reincarnated identities that also have different probable selves. Okay? All these probable selves are part of the soul. They are all variations of the true identity. So in other words, for the soul to know itself, it has created us. and many other aspects of ourselves that we would consider probable identities. So our soul has helped us create ourselves, and our soul is also helping create other probable selves. And each one of these probable selves thinks it's separate, and just the same way as we do would expect that we don't exist, or maybe unknown that we even exist. And our, shall we say, I don't know, job or purpose or the next phase is for us to become aware of all our probable selves. Now, as far as the timeline goes, that's going to start with past lives. So as our consciousness grows and becomes more aware, one of the first things that we're going to do is become aware of our past lives. Those are other probable selves of our soul. Okay, to go on. They are not lost, buried, or negated in some super self without free will, self-determination, or individuality. Instead, the identity is what they are, with full freedom to express all probable actions and developments, both in this reality and in others that you do not know. As you sit reading this book in your present moment of time, you are positioned in the center of a cosmic web of probabilities that is affected by your slightest mental or emotional act. Your thoughts and emotions, therefore, go forth from you, not only in all physical directions, but in directions that are quite invisible to you, appearing in dimensions that you would not presently understand. Now you are also the receiver of other such signals, coming from other probabilities that are connected with your own. But you choose which of those probable actions you want to make real or physical in your system, as others also have the freedom of choice in their systems. You originate ideas then and receive them. But you are not forced to actualize unrealized probable acts that come to you from other probable selves. Now, there is a natural attraction between yourself and other probable selves, electromagnetic connections having to do with simultaneous propulsions of energy. By this I mean energy that appears simultaneously both to you and probable selves in other realities. Psychic connections having to do with a uniting, sympathetic, emotional reaction, and a connection that shows up very strongly in the dream state. In that state, with the functions of the ego somewhat stilled, there is some considerable communication between various portions of the entire identity. In dreams, you may have glimpses of probable roads that you might have taken. You may think that these are fantasy, but instead you may be perceiving a legitimate picture of events that did occur within other systems of probabilities. One event can be actualized by more than one probable self, however, and you will resemble some probable selves more than others. Because you are involved in an intricate psychological gestalt such as this, and because the connections mentioned earlier do exist, you can avail yourself to some extent of abilities and knowledge possessed by these other probable portions of your personality. Now that's key. You can draw upon the abilities of your other probable selves. You can know the knowledge of your other probable selves. So all of a sudden, voila, You can draw upon the abilities of your other probable selves. You can gain the knowledge that your other probable selves have learned. This can be directly given to you through direct knowing. So all of a sudden, your abilities, your knowledge that you have access to has all of a sudden opened up 100-fold. It's simply for you to believe that this is possible, open up the channels and allow the abilities to enhance yourself. Allow the knowledge to fill your mind. It can be done. The connections make for quite constant bleed-throughs. Once you are aware of the probable system, however, you will also learn to become alert to what I will here call benign intrusive impulses. Such impulses would seem to be disconnected from your own current interests or activities, intrusive in that they can come quickly into consciousness with a sense of strangeness as if they are not your own. These can often offer clues of various kinds. You may know absolutely nothing about music, for example, and one afternoon while in the middle of some mundane activity, be struck by a sudden impulse to buy a violin. Such an impulse could be an indication that another probable portion of your identity is gifted with that instrument. I'm not telling you to run off and buy one, but you could, however, act on the impulse as far as is reasonably possible. Renting a violin, simply acquainting yourself with violin concerti, etc. You would learn the instrument far quicker, you see, if the impulse was originating with a probable self. It goes without saying, then, that probable selves exist in your future as well as your past. It is very poor policy to dwell negatively on unpleasant aspects of the past that you know, because some portions of the probable self may still be involved in that past. The concentration can allow greater bleed-through and adverse identification, because that part will be one background that you have in common with any probable selves who sprang from that particular source. To dwell upon the possibility of illness or disaster is equally poor policy, for you set up negative webs of probabilities that need not occur. You can theoretically alter your own past as you have known it, for time is no more something divorced from you than probabilities are. Now, that last sentence that I read is absolutely phenomenal. He means it literally, that you can alter your own past as you have known it. And he goes on to explain, if not in this book, the next book, on how to do that. The past existed in multitudinous ways. You have only experienced one probable past. By changing this past in your mind now, in your present, you can change not only its nature, but its effect. And not only upon yourself, but others. Okay, so he's going to give you a little glimpse of how to do this. Pretend a particular event happened that greatly disturbed you. In your mind, imagine it not simply wiped out, but replaced by another event of a more beneficial nature. Now, this must be done with great vividness and emotional validity, and many times. It is not self-deception. The event that you choose will automatically be a probable event, which did in fact happen, though it is not the event you chose to perceive in your given probable past. Telepathically, if the process is done correctly, your idea will also affect any people who were connected with the original event, though they can choose to reject as well as accept your version. Now, this is not a book on techniques, so I will not go into this particular method deeply, but merely mention it here. Remember, however, that in a most legitimate way, many events that are not physically perceived or experienced are as valid as those that are, and are as real within your own invisible psychological environment. There are, in your terms then, unlimited probable future events for which you are now setting groundworks. The nature of the thoughts and feelings you originate and those that you habitually or characteristically receive set a pattern. So you will choose from those probable futures those events that will physically become your experience. Because there are bleed-throughs and interconnections, it is possible for you to tune into a future event, say, of an unfortunate nature, an event for which you are headed if you continue on your present course. A dream about it, for instance, may so frighten you that you avoid the event and do not experience it. If so, such a dream is a message from a probable self who did experience the event. So, can a child then in a dream receive such communications from a probable future self of such a nature that its life is completely changed? The entire identity is being now. All divisions are merely illusions. So, one probable self can hold out a helping hand to another. And through these intercommunications, the various probable selves in your terms begin to understand the nature of their identity. Now, this leads to other adventures in which whole civilizations may be involved. For as individuals have their probable destinies, so do civilizations, nations, and inhabited planetary systems. Your historical Earth, as you know it, has developed in many different ways, and there is deeply unconscious connection that unites all such manifestations. In their own way, even atoms and molecules retain a knowledge of the forms through which they have passed. And so, the individuals that compose any given civilization contain deep within themselves the inner knowledge of experiments and trials, successes and failures in which the races have also been involved at other levels of reality. In some probable realities, Christianity, as you know it, did not flourish. In some, males did not dominate. In others, the makeup of physical matter simply followed different lines. Now, all these probabilities are in the air about you, so to speak, and I describe them as faithfully as I can, but I must relate them with concepts with which you are somewhat familiar. To some extent, then, the quote, truth, unquote, must be sifted through your own conceptual patterns in order for you to comprehend it at all. Suffice it to say, you are surrounded by other influences and events. Certain of these you perceive in your three-dimensional reality. You accept them as real without realizing that they are only portions of other events. Where your vision fails, you think reality ceases. So again, you must train yourselves to look between events, between objects, within yourself, when you do not seem to be doing anything. Watch out for events that appear to make no sense, for they are often clues to larger invisible events. In other words, what he's saying is, all events that we experience are simply a portion of larger events, okay? And we're seeing a portion of the event, but other aspects of that event are materialized in the other probable realities. So we can learn through connecting ourselves up with our other probable selves. We can learn also about other probable events, other aspects of the events that we experience. This leads to a more richness, a deeper fulfillment of each moment of our lives. And in actuality, you can train yourself to experience this, and you might try by first imagining, and then as you develop a greater skill, he says that you'll find that some of these intrusive bleed-throughs come through of these probable realities, and then you can recognize those as such. The more and more that you do this, then the more you'll understand what an intrusive event is, because you're already familiar with your own mind. All right, there was one or two things that we read here in this particular session that stood out and can really be important. For one, it's just almost unbelievable but true, where he says, you can theoretically alter your own past as you have known it. For time is no more something divorced from you than probabilities are. And it reminds me of a quote by Einstein, which I don't remember exactly, but boiled down to that he said, time is an illusion, albeit a very stubborn one. Okay, and he dealt with relativity and time and mass and energy, and he could understand that depending on your position in different aspects of the universe, you perceived time in different ways, and this was actually true and has been proven. So if you can perceive time in different ways, in sense it can either be lengthened or shortened, then it makes sense that there is an ability for you to actually manipulate time. That's another aspect of what we're supposed to learn. And we're supposed to learn how to manipulate psychological time, okay? So he says we can alter our past. And then he goes on just briefly to explain that we do it by substituting an event to replace the one that occurred, and mentally and vividly and with strong emotion imagine that more than once, quite a few times, and in doing so telepathically that spills over to affect the people that also experience that event, and then they choose whether they want to sort of replace what actually did happen with this new probable event that you are imagining and telepathically sending out. It may sound really strange, but it's important to learn these different aspects. I think the part where he says we are immersed in a sea of probabilities is one of the keys here. Over here he says, as you sit reading this book, in your present moment of time, you are positioned in the center of a cosmic web of probabilities that is affected by your slightest mental or emotional act. All right, that's another way of putting it. It says there are deep connections between yourself and all those individuals with whom you've had relationships. It says you exist in the middle of the probable system of reality. The invisible environment within your mind is not as lonely as you might think. Your seeming inner isolation is caused by the ego's persistent guard. Actually, out of all of this, even though it's important to understand probabilities, I want to talk about this sentence. And the reason is this. We overall have this tendency to feel some aloneness, some loneliness in that we go about our business. The center of the world comes out of our head as we perceive everything, and we sometimes don't feel really deep, constant, serious connections with other people or with God, and so we feel alone, almost isolated. He is explaining the reason why here. And the reason it's important to know that is because if you know why, then you can get to the belief, you can change the belief, and then as you change that belief in a certain way, then you can feel less alone or less isolated. So this is the reason that we feel that. He says the ego's persistent guard. Okay? So what that means is, if you think about yourself right now, this very second, you are the ego. That's when he says, talks about the ego. Now, the persistent guard means that we have these filters up all the time. The ego puts these filters up like a fence all around us, and it doesn't let through perceptions that it doesn't think are necessary for us to do our daily activities. So by all that filtering out, that's why we feel this loneliness. Therefore, we can change the fence. We can change the filters that our ego puts up. It doesn't have to be a guard. Our ego can become a guardian. Our ego can become a helper. And as it does that, as it changes its role, then it allows other perceptions to come in that could be from our other probable selves, and in doing so, at least we'd connect up with other aspects of ourselves, and we would find out that we exist in other dimensions, other realities. It would open up a wide range of possible thoughts, emotions, experiences, beliefs, changes in how we act and behave in our relationships with each other. We would understand each other on a much deeper level. We'd understand ourselves on a much deeper level. A lot of our conflicts would vanish. All we need to do is change our ego from being a guard to being a guardian. Okay, a guardian is somebody who helps guide us. It doesn't need to guard us. It guides us. So instead of even concentrating on the fact that we feel lonely because of our ego, let's just change to the new belief. And that new belief is, now my ego is a helpful guardian. And as we change ourselves and change that belief, then that will allow new perceptions in, and we won't feel so lonely anymore. We won't feel that isolation. We'll begin to get perceptions and sensations that are connected with other aspects of ourselves. All right, so the sentence is, now my ego is a helpful guardian. These probable selves are to gain awareness of the other probable selves and realize that all are various manifestations of the true identity. These probable selves are to gain awareness of the other probable selves and realize that all are various manifestations of the true identity. And I'm going to just reiterate or stop for a second. What he's telling us there is that our soul has divested itself into multiple aspects of consciousness that have identity. They are different reincarnated identities that also have different probable selves. Okay? All these probable selves are part of the soul. They are all variations of the true identity. So in other words, for the soul to know itself, it has created us and many other aspects of ourselves that we would consider probable identities. So our soul has helped us create ourselves, and our soul is also helping create other probable selves. And each one of these probable selves thinks it's separate and just the same way as we do would expect that we don't exist, or maybe unknown that we even exist. And our, shall we say, I don't know, job or purpose or the next phase is for us to become aware of all our probable selves. Now, as far as the timeline goes, that's going to start with past lives. So as our consciousness grows and becomes more aware, one of the first things that we're going to do is become aware of our past lives. Those are other probable selves of our soul. Okay, to go on.